9 a.m. Let's prepare to begin, please. Good morning. My name is Felicia Orth, hearing officer appointed by the Water Quality Control Commission to conduct a hearing in WQCC 23-84. This is a proposed new rule relating to water reuse. We're on the 10th day of hearing, and this is one of many opportunities to offer public comment before we return to the technical case. Just a few things about offering public comment. One, I have to ask that you collect your thoughts and offer comment just once. Two, the public comment is limited to 3 minutes. If you have more to say than can be said in 3 minutes, we strongly encourage you to put your comments in writing and submit them to Pam Jones, the same commission administrator with whom you would have signed up to offer comment. I will ask you to spell your first and last name for the transcript. I will ask you to speak slowly because we have both a court reporter and a team of interpreters interpreting between Spanish and English who are trying to catch your every word. And I will ask you to swear or affirm that you will tell the truth. So let me begin with Sierra Smith. Is Sierra Smith on the platform? I think.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. If you would spell your name, please.
It's Sierra Smith.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I swear or affirm to tell the truth.
Thank you. I'll start your 3 minutes.
I wanted to state my concerns about the reuse of treated fracking chemicals in agriculture and its potential to harm human lives. Produced water is toxic and has been found to contain a whole slew of chemicals that have been linked to many health problems, including cancer. Not to mention that this is coming from the chemicals we know, as the gas and oil industry is allowed to keep many of the chemicals they use secret. Allowing this water reuse off the oil field could allow our farm animals to ingest feed contaminated with this toxic slush, transferring health concerns to us. It could also come straight to us via food crops when used in irrigation. EPA states that there must be no contact between the water and the edible part of the plant, but the water is transferred to every place in the crop. This is an experiment with our health. I believe we need a ruling that prohibits the discharge of produced water into ground and surface water and reuse off the oil field. Thank you for listening, and I yield my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Smith. Patrick Jaramillo? No, and I don't see him in the room. If he joins us before we're done with the session, Pam, let me know. Joe Munley? Mr. Munley? All right. Mia Montoya Hammersley. Ms. Hammersley?
Yes, good morning. Good
Good
morning.
morning. Would you spell your names for the record, please?
Yes, my first name is Mia. That's M-I-A, Montoya, M-O-N-T-O-Y-A, Hammersley. That's H-A-M-M-E-R-S-L-E-Y.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
I'll start your 3 minutes.
Thank you, and good morning, commissioners. I appreciate the opportunity to provide comment. My name is Mia Montoya Hammersley. I'm the director of the Environmental Justice Clinic at the Vermont Law and Graduate School, but I am also a member of the Piro Manso-Tewa tribe and a New Mexican with family and loved ones throughout the state. I offer this comment in support of everyone who has spoken this week to express their concern about the draft wastewater reuse rule under consideration by the Commission. As others have pointed out, the term produced water is an egregious attempt to greenwash an extremely hazardous substance known to contain harmful forever chemicals known as PFAS and various human carcinogens. Fracking waste reuse outside of an oil field is prohibited under the Produced Water Act, and the oil and gas industry should not be allowed to circumvent the protections of this act through the expansion of reuses outlined in this proposed rule, particularly without a rigorous scientific showing that fracking waste treatment and reuse can be accomplished safely. Any expansion of the use of fracking waste poses an unacceptable threat to our water resources and community health. No use of this toxic substance is a beneficial use. I also offer my thoughts on the root of the problem that the Commission is seeking to solve, which, as I understand it, is the high level of waste produced by fracking operations within the state. Fracking is not only harmful to the environment and community health, but incredibly inefficient. For every barrel of oil produced, approximately 4 barrels of waste are generated. This problem could be alleviated by the transition away from a fossil fuel economy, which is crucial for the future and well-being of New Mexico communities. I have several family members who lost their homes during this summer's wildfires and post-fire flooding in Ruidoso, one of the latest climate change-fueled natural disasters in the state. Now is not the time to expand the reach of the fracking industry, which would perpetuate the harmful effects of climate change already being experienced by communities across the state. In order to safeguard the future of New Mexico communities, I urge you to rewrite the proposed rule to prohibit the discharge, disposal, or reuse of treated or untreated produced water outside the oil field without exception. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hammersley. And I forgot to invite the lead of our team of interpreters, Lisa O'Grady, to make a statement about the globe at the bottom of your screen. Lisa?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Good morning, everyone. If you would like to listen to the interpretation in Spanish, you'll need to choose the Spanish channel. All you have to do is go to the bottom of your WebEx screen and you'll click on the globe and then choose Spanish. Si hay alguien que quiere ocupar los servicios de las intérpretes, entonces nada más tiene que hacer clic en el globo que está a pie de su pantalla y seleccionar el español. If anyone would like to make a public comment in Spanish, if you could please let us know, and if you also have a written copy of your comment, we would appreciate you sending that to us as well. Y si hay alguien que quisiera hacer su comentario público en español, por favor avísenos. Y también le agradeceríamos de antemano si nos puede pasar una copia por escrito. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Joe Munley apparently is on the line now. Mr. Munley? Okay. Mr. Munley?
I did it once. There. Hello?
Yes, hello, I can hear you.
Okay.
If you would please spell your name for the transcript.
Joe Munley, Joemunley.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. I'll start your 3 minutes.
I'm 77 years old and have had a lifetime of seeing negative, deadly environmental events that were the result of industrial and political noncompliance with the safety and environmental laws. To name a few, as a child, the family business, the Valley View Coal Company, run by my father, closed after a nearby mine dug directly under the Susquehanna River, causing the river to break into the many layers of the mines below and flow downriver for 30 miles, ending the anthracite coal industry in the United States. My family moved to New Jersey, where my father would die from working at the massive Johns Manville asbestos plant, along with 99% of the employees, even though the company knew of the dangers to the employees. I lived in New Hampshire in 1972 and learned from a neighbor that he had worked on the original design of the first nuclear power plants in the US, and that half of the safety devices have been dropped because of the financial cost. I lived in Brooklyn, New York, and learned I was 3 blocks from a nuclear storage facility for the East Coast. A high school 2 blocks from the facility had an environmental club and was able to walk into the facility and take pictures showing that safety regulations were not being followed. I worked in the South Bronx and attended Community Board 2 meetings when the neighborhood, along with Harlem, had the highest asthma rates in the country. I asked if a computer search of how the areas with the high asthma were unique environmentally and didn't get a response. A few years later, I learned there was a waiver on the types of heating fuel oil and a lower grade was allowed in the South Bronx and Harlem, some of the poorest areas of the country. Now, 30 years later, I'm living in Albuquerque and I've learned from attending the fracking ordinance hearings in Sandoval County about the health issues and asthma rates in children in the tri-chapter area due to nearby fracking. I also learned it would take 10 years for all the oil and gas wells to be inspected once due to the low number of inspectors. It is with this background that I fear the public use of produced water in New Mexico will result in more illnesses and death due to the many chemicals and radiation in the water. Please use science, reason, and experience to not allow produced water use outside the oil and gas industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Munley. Marvin Nash? No, all right. Pilar Hernandez? Ms. Hernandez?
Hello.
Hello. Would you spell your name for the transcript, please?
Yes, Pilar, Pilar, Hernandez, Hernandez.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'll start your 3 minutes.
All right. Good morning, Chair, members of the Commission, and hearing officer. As you heard, my name is Pilar Hernandez, and I am from Santa Fe, New Mexico. I am part of the youth organization Yucca, which is dedicated to bringing about climate justice in a way that decentralizes colonial tactics and instead places the people's needs first. As someone that was born and raised here in Santa Fe, from very early on, it was emphasized to me and my peers alike in school, in youth programs, in the Children's Museum, even that our water was not to be wasted. We were told this because it was known that we as a state suffer from the scarcity of water. Whatever little water we have, we must appreciate. Water was also a healing source for me as someone who suffers from heavy fatigue and rashes under the sun. My reliance on water was and still is immense. Growing up with this mindset, you come to realize just how sacred water is. To have the privilege to have clean, potable water is to have life. This is why I wanted to make a comment today on the Wastewater Reuse Rule 23-48. This rule falls under the pretense of fracking industries regulating their water and controlling their waste. However, the rule is truly too vague to really reassure communities that their water will be safe to consume. The rule allows industries to treat their water as they seem fit, and as long as there's no discharge to ground or surface water, there's no problem. Though this, we get produced water, which isn't really water, and instead a highly toxic and carcinogenic liquid that will harm communities once it comes to contact with humans and other beings alike. With this information, still only 14% of its chemical makeup has been adequately assessed for health impacts. Time and time again, we see industries hide important information that could especially affect communities of color. We see livelihoods sacrificed for profit. The approval of this rule would ignore the fact that there is still a lot unregulated. There could still be spills, accident, and unforeseen events that could cause this toxic liquid to spread. There are still no scientifically based standards for the treatment, handling, risk, abatement, or even financial assurances for this liquid. These are all clearly important things to consider before the advancement of this rule. Again, I and many community members alike believe that humans' rights to live with potable water should come before any amount of profit. A rule is needed to regulate the unspeakable amount of waste these industries create, but it has to be a rule better than this one that considers the complexities of what it means to have the needs of the people first, and not what an industry should need to succeed. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Hernandez. Yaz Elliott pending. Can you unmute yourself? Yaz Elliott pending. Oh, may have stepped away. All right, Roberto Felix.
Yes, hello. Good
Oh,
morning, everyone. I
hello.
would like to,
Would you spell your name for the record,
yes, of
please?
course. Robertofelix.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
To the best of my knowledge, of course.
Thank you. I'll start your 3 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to come forward with you today to address the cost of this operation, as well as some additional concerns with regards to the environment. Firstly, we have what are known as PFAS, which we do not currently have extensive means with which to treat. And as a result, this novel technology, along with the massive demand for this treatment, 160 million gallons of daily throughput just for 2021 alone, is going to cost well over, for the cheapest treatment, according to EPA estimates, well over $50 million annually. This is a grand cost to everyone, and I do not believe that citizens, the New Mexico constituency, needs to be the one to foot the bill on this. I believe that it is entirely gas companies that need to be put on the bill for this, as well as tightened regulations for the successful completion of this task. This is all nothing to say of the many, many, many upwards of 200 to 1,000 water tankers per well to be transported to a facility through their lifetime, each of which being another massive failure point for seepage onto grounds and into our plants. To make this potable water treatable for our agriculture is all well and good. However, PFAS are so persistent, just like heavy metals, that even a small amount will lead to adverse effects such as cancer. This material can be transferred either from water to plant, or from plant to livestock, or from livestock to us as we sit down for Thanksgiving. Once again, I ask that regulations be severely tightened and penalties severely increased for those who refuse to play by the rules and who wish to pollute our environment for political and provincial income. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you, Mr. Felix. I understand Mr. Nash, Marvin Nash, is one of the call-in users. Can you unmute yourself, Mr. Nash? Okay, Mr. Nash, can you hear me?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. You're call-in user 4. Would you spell your name for the transcript, please?
Marvin, Marvin, Nash, Nash.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'll start your 3 minutes.
Madam Hearing Officer, can I have 30 seconds prior to my 3 minutes? Very quickly. I'll be brief, and this is very important. Has nothing to do with the conversation itself, but it does have to do with this hearing. So if you could oblige me for just a second. I'm not there, but yesterday, while listening on the phone over the noon hour, a call came in and the Madden hearing officer took the call. Mind you, it was over the noon break. The hearing officer was on the phone with a rather senior citizen elderly lady, and she was extremely concerned about her ability to make her comments. The hearing officer, rather than just saying, ma'am, you'll have to call back and run our noon break, took a couple of minutes. She comforted this lady. She encouraged this lady, and she gave her confidence on how important her call was. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not every day that one gets to witness the passion and effort to include all people. It was an honor to see such an example of true professionalism. If I were there now, I currently would ask for a round of applause for the hearing officer and for the commission for the great work they are doing. If you would allow me my 3 minutes, Madam Hearing Officer, I'll proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Burnett. My goodness, you guys are too much.
The issue before WQCC is a clear division of two camps. One from the environmental side, a message of doom and gloom, fear and destruction. The other from the energy producers with a message of doom and gloom if we do not allow a pathway for process for additional disposal. I would like to represent a third camp, the stewardship camp, and the New Mexico Constitution, which calls for putting water to beneficial use. The stewardship must include brackish and industrial use water. The New Mexico Constitution, your Constitution, provides for the only pathway to put water to beneficial use because the state and the citizens own the water. Wyoming is the most similar to Mexico with state laws. One of the first beneficial use application permits was issued. I know because I initiated the forcing function for the permit to be issued by the state of Wyoming. It has been done. Texas most likely can accomplish what New Mexico cannot. Texas cannot accomplish what New Mexico can simply because of the legal question of who owns the water. I speak with authority on this because the permit Rick McCurdy called first for Texas yesterday was granted to the landowner based on my company's application, which became Letter of Authority, Railroad Commission 00200. New Mexico is the only state that can solve the chicken and the egg dilemma. So let's never say never and get past the chicken and the egg. The Constitution, created by the forefathers of New Mexico, is the legal stewardship directive to put water to beneficial use. That's number one. Number two, the directive Constitution requires and provides a regulatory agency, NMED, to develop a permit process for all water, which would include brackish, industrial, and byproduct. Comically, let's say there goes the chicken. By simply requiring applicants to follow a prescriptive process, a permit could be designed by engineering firms to provide a seal of approval. I have accomplished this twice, once in Wyoming and once in Texas. The prescriptive process for regulatory authority is in line with other agencies. They build roads, they construct highways, they build malls, they drill water wells, moving the country forward. So there goes the egg. There goes the dilemma. I wish you Godspeed. Your decision, your Constitution will provide a safe growth for New Mexico and others for years to come, not just for energy, but for industry through the foresight of the stewardship of the Constitution. New Mexico, the beneficial use, and New Mexico can become the beneficial use water capital of the world. Not enough help, we say. Let's train New Mexico youth to be the stewards of water. New Mexico will never say no. We'll have an advisory board in New Mexico set up next week. I hold the U.S. Patent 118-44316, method for processing byproduct water for optimal beneficial use. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for the work that you're doing and the way that you're doing it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nash. Ariel Prado? Ariel Prado?
Hi, this is Ariel Prado.
Hello. Would you spell your name for the transcript, please?
Of course, it's Ariel is my first name, and P as in Paul, Rado is my last name.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
All right, I'll start your 3 minutes.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Ariel Prado with the Torrance County Listening Project. Over the last couple of years, the Torrance County Listening Project has been going door to door, talking to folks in Torrance County about why they love where they live, what changes and challenges they have seen in their community, and what hopes they have for the future. Almost everybody brings up stories about water. How wells are drying up, how you have to dig deeper and deeper to get to water, how water is being extracted, exported, and neglected by industries that come into communities making big promises, only to leave towns ghosts of their once thriving selves. We hear how the weather in the land they love is changing into increasingly drier and hotter climates. Water is a powerful presence in the memories and histories of the people we speak to. It is essential to their lives today. When they speak of the future of their children, grandchildren, and beyond, they are aware of the precarious future of water in their communities, and many consider it their responsibility to fight for abundant, accessible, and clean water for all. Throughout this hearing, you've heard powerful testimony on the harms of this proposed rule to the land, water, and people of New Mexico. So at this point, I would like to continue to uplift the voices of generations of New Mexicans that have consistently told these industries and those we elect about the profound harm that is incurred to the land, to the people, to water, and to all living things when industries of extraction ignore the will of the people and impose their will on them. And it is these voices that have, do, and will continue to remind us of the importance of protecting an irreplaceable necessity of all life, water. How has the oil and gas industry responded? By imposing even more of their waste problem on not only this generation of New Mexicans, but on future generations as well. We have been honored to learn about our history, the present moment, and the future possibilities from listening to our neighbors and being changed by what they have shared. We strongly urge the Water Quality Control Commission to listen to, learn from, and be changed by everyone that has spoken to you this week and in previous hearings. We urge you to consider the legacy you will leave in this moment for those we will never know and who will be here long after we are gone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Prado. Let's see. We have, unless Yaz Elliott Pending has stepped back to the computer. Can you hear me?
Hi, yes, I apologize about that.
Oh, great. If you would please spell your name for the transcript.
Sure, my first name is Yaj, Y-A-Z-H. Last name's Pending, P-E-N-D-I-N-G.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'll start your 3 minutes.
Great, thank you so much. My name is Yaj Pending. I am a Diné Hickory Apache Two-Spirit person in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm deeply concerned about the Rule 2348, which proposes the expansion of produced water use without scientifically based standards for its treatment, handling, or disposal. Produced water is a toxic and radioactive substance that poses significant risks to our environment and public health. Allowing its use in large-scale industrial and demonstration projects without rigorous oversight is reckless and could have devastating consequences. I urge the Commission to prioritize public safety and environmental protection by rejecting this rule or revising it to include strict science-based standards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pending. The only person I didn't hear from who signed up is Patrick Jaramillo. Mr. Jaramillo, are you on platform? Oh, great. Come on up to this table, please. If there is anyone on the platform who would like to make a comment during the session and has not yet commented, please reach out to Pam through the chat or email. Let us know you're there. The next public comment session will be at 1 p.m. today. Great. Mr. Jaramillo, if you would please spell your name for the transcript.
Now,
Too close.
PAT. That's fine, or it was. I just needed to turn it. PATRICKJARAMILLO.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do swear.
Thank you. I'll start your 3 minutes.
My name is Patrick Jaramillo. Work for the American Friends Service Committee. I am no Mexicano, Asequiero. This always happens in these situations. I prepare remarks, get nervous, go blank. I'm not going to share anything that you have not heard already. So I'm going to keep my remarks short. I'm asking you to reject this rule as written because it just does not provide the safeguards necessary. We need this rule because especially the produced water. The produced water exists. We need to deal with it. But as is, without the safeguards for agriculture, for human health, for the environment, all this is doing is removing the liability of oil and gas and the toxic and radioactive waste that they're going to dump on us. They're going to make it the public's problem. So they're getting all the profit and they're going to pass the waste on to us. As if the rule as written. There is immense opportunity to take advantage of this new waste because this is the world we're moving towards. But until there is real scientifically based methods to safeguard the people of this place, this rule cannot go forward as written. So go ahead and yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jaramillo. Pam, did anyone reach out? All right. Is there anyone else in the room who would like to offer comment at this time? The next session is at 1 p.m. Nope. All right. Let's return to the technical case. When we broke, let's see, I believe Ms. Nanasi was questioning Mr. Curdy. We'll give folks a moment to take their places. Whenever you're ready, Ms. Nanasi.
Good morning. This morning I uploaded New Energy Economy Exhibit 35, which is, I believe, the list of constituents that you referred to yesterday. That was from the New Mexico Produced Water Research Consortium. Could you take a look? Could your attorney show you that and tell me if this is what you were referring to when you were testifying yesterday?
And for clarity, when I was referring to the NIPD's plus list, okay. Yes, Ms. Nanazi, I believe that is that NIPD's plus list.
And so, sir, going back to some of the previous questions that I asked you about, if this commission would require a permit for pilot projects, would you agree that what is shown here, which is New Energy Economy Exhibit 35, that what's listed as NMPWRC list, would you agree that at least these constituents should be tested for?
Yes, ma'am. I have no reason to say otherwise because this is a list that is being used in other areas as well.
And sir, do you happen to know if this list was created in conjunction with members of New Mexico Environment Department?
It is my understanding that that is correct, that they had input into this list.
Did they ask for anything that is not on this list?
To my knowledge, I'm not aware.
And I'm not going to ask you about all of them,
Thank
but
you.
I want to ask you about what's listed as number 66 and 60 through 71. Could you please state for the record what that group of constituents consist of and why they're on that list?
Yes, ma'am. Those are the radionuclides, specifically radium-226, radium-228, gross alpha beta, uranium-235, 36, and 38, strontium-90, and tritium. And I believe they're on the list because, as you've heard from many, that produced water often contains to some level these different constituents that are radioactive materials. So not only do you need to know what's in the produced water, the raw produced water, but you need to ensure that it did not make it through the treatment process.
Madam Hearing Examiner, I'd move admission of New Energy Economy Exhibit 34 and 35. I'll pause for a moment in the event there are objections. Any E34 and 35 are admitted. Thank you. I just have a couple of other areas that I'd like to talk to you about.
Alrighty.
And that is about the RFI that Select Water Solutions submitted to the NMED on March 29th, 2024. And it lists you, just to be in context.
I understand. I was the primary author for that response.
Okay, and it lists your name specifically as the contact person, correct?
Yes.
So if you could pull or ask your lawyer to please pull up New Energy Economy Exhibit 21, please. and then go to, well, let's just go to the first page first. So this is a essentially
I'm not sure I have 21 file here. Let me look at it. A different.
Can I email it to you?
Sure. And in the meantime, I'll look here and see if I do have it.
I think I did, but I will do that.
We do have it here.
So, sir, this is a table that Mr. Noble made, and it was his work product essentially of the different RFI submissions and whether those entities mentioned radioactivity as an issue in their RFI. And so on the top, it's just, I'm just going to read, and if you can tell me if I read this correctly. Okay. It says name of company, mentions, and then the next column says mentions, quote, radiation or, quote, radioactivity in RFI, question mark, question mark. The next column is mentions, quote, radium, unquote, in RFI, question mark, question mark. And then the next column says mentions, quote, radon, quote, unquote, in RFI, question mark, question mark. The next one says mentions, quote, norm, unquote, or, quote, T-norm, unquote, in RFI, question mark, question mark. And then it says, in the last column, it says response to questions 7 and 8 of RFI about, quote, impediments, unquote, and, quote, technical challenges, unquote.
Yes.
Did I read that correctly?
You did read that correctly.
Okay, so if you go down now to select water solutions. It's true, is it not, that your application or your submission to NMED did not include anything about radioactivity in or radon or radium in your RFI. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Then in the last column, I wanted to ask you about something that is in your RFI, and specifically toward the end of that the last column, it says, this is what it was written from your RFI. This is a robust group of contaminants, and knowing if they have been removed is crucial to this process being accepted by the citizenry of New Mexico, semicolon. However, if the state required these analyses daily as part of the use of a treated produced water, the cost of analysis alone would make the concept impractical. To make this concept more economically feasible, it will be necessary to identify surrogate tests that will allow for fewer total analyses while still providing assurance that the treated water is suitable for the application and the environment, or developing real-time monitoring that does the same. Did you write that in your RFI?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And so this was correctly taken down by Mr. Noble, correct?
It is.
Okay, and could you tell the commission what you meant by that, please?
So the previous submitted list, the NIPTES plus list that we went through with the 400 plus contaminants, and there was a section in there specifically for various radionuclides, and we discussed that just a few minutes ago. But if we have to run all 400 of those products daily, that test alone is somewhere in the neighborhood of $15,000 to $20,000. That alone would just basically stop where we're going now, because this would not be it. it would just be a money losing situation to try to treat this water. So what I've said before, and I'll say it again in here, and I've said it with the various consortiums, is one of the goals of research is to find either a surrogate test, something that measures just total radioactivity and say it cannot be above this level. And as long as it's not above that level, then we know all these constituents are in line with the requirements. That would be a simpler test that would still prove that we could do it safely. Or we need a monitoring tool, real-time monitoring tool in the water where we're constantly tracking that information.
And, but you would, I hear what you just said, which is basically you can't do this every day. It would be economically infeasible. Is that right?
That is correct.
And so how often would you think that it would be appropriate to require the full scale tests?
So, good question. It depends on the volume of the water moving through the system. And ideally, I would like real-time information. Now, up front, when we do these pilot projects or these, what was the other word we used yesterday? But anyway, on those, we're almost going to have to do them. We need that data up front to determine that, yes, this process is performing as it is. But while we're working through this pilot project process, we need to be working on an answer to this to work. And it's not just radionuclides, it's other things that are in the water as well. Can we find a test that will cover 10 or 12 different constituents that are all under the same general vicinity, like a semi-volatile organic compound? Can we find one test that will cover all the radionuclides and give us an answer that we're comfortable with? Or again, a real-time monitoring probe that will give us that information. In the meantime, and I'm not advocating that we move away from this list, I'm just saying that is going to be an ultimate goal to make this feasible, is that we have to be able to do it, producing good data that the citizenry is content with, but at the same time, not bankrupting the process.
So, but back to my question, how often would you suggest that it would be reasonable to require the whole list?
It's depending on the size of the system. If it was a 500 barrel a day system, perhaps you do it once a week. If it's a 50,000 barrel a day system, then maybe you need to do it 2 or 3 times a week or once or twice a day. You get up to that size volume, then we almost have to have some sort of real-time monitoring or a surrogate test that can be run multiple times a day.
Do those surrogate tests exist?
For some of these compounds, they do. If they, again, I'm not a radioactivity expert. I do not know if there's one that covers all of those radionuclides right now. There probably have to be somebody, maybe perhaps Mr. Jacoby could answer that better than I can.
You say further in your RFI, the current challenge that we and many others face is finding a treatment technology that will provide significant quantities of clean, treated, produced water at a reasonable price. And this is sort of a nice encapsulation of what you were just saying, isn't that right?
Well, and then that statement is bringing into 2 other things. One is there are no existing technologies available right now commercially that'll treat these huge volumes, 20, 30, 40,000 barrels of water a day. We have systems, probably right now, the largest one out there will give you about 1,500 barrels of clean water a day. The larger scale pilot projects that are in the field now are somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 500, 600 barrels of water a day. So we're having to move along because we don't have this opportunity to do this. We're going through rulemaking here. We're working with Texas on what they're doing there. We're not going to go out and invest tens of millions of dollars in this equipment until we know it can be done. So that's a challenge. And doing it, once again, if I come in and give you an opportunity or give you a technology that will produce water at $5 a barrel, nobody's going to do that. There are other cheaper alternatives to dispose of that water. So we have to get down closer to where the existing disposal rate is today in order to make it feasible.
I want to talk to you just a couple of questions about your rebuttal. I have 1 minute, hearing officer. In your, I just want to go back to the RFI for a second before I go to the rebuttal. In the RFI, I believe you talk about something called filter cake.
Mhm.
Could you please make an answer to my question that's verbal?
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Yes, ma'am.
So yes to that last question.
Yes, I did make a comment about filter cake in the RFI.
Could you please explain what filter cake is?
If I remember correctly, how I was referring to it in the RFI. Again, and I mentioned this, I believe, yesterday, some of these treatment processes, particularly the thermal desal processes, particularly the historical ones that have been used, you needed to pull the divalent cations out of the water. These are the elements that cause mineral scale formation, particularly such as calcium carbonate scaling. By the divalents, I mean calcium, magnesium, barium, strontium. They need to be pulled out to prevent plugging up the pipes in this equipment, because typically calcium will come out of solution at high temperatures. You do that through a process that precipitates these out prior to treatment. You take those solids that have fallen out, you dewater them, usually using a filter press, to where now they are a dry cake, and that dry cake has to be disposed of in a landfill. The goal is to get to a technology to where we don't have to do that today, thus eliminating one of the waste streams.
But that technology doesn't exist today.
No, it does exist today.
And when you say you take that to a landfill, is that filter cake analyzed?
Yes. So yes, it is. Generally up front, you believe, if I remember correctly, it's what's called a T-clip analysis is done on it. Sorry, TCLP, T-clip. Apologize. That's given to the landfill or environmental landfill that we're going to be bringing you these kind of waste. And then past that point, most landfills, their main requirement is radioactivity has to be below a certain level, particularly up in the Northeast, up in the Marcellus, where this is generally a problem. Slow myself down. And because drill cuttings.
Because what?
Drill cuttings out of the Marcellus tend to have a level of radioactivity in them. So you have to monitor that to make sure you're not, a lot of times those drill cuttings are taken to landfills for disposal. So you have to make sure that you're below, and I believe it's 50 picocuries. 50 picocuries, if I remember correctly. To be honest with you, I was never part of the environmental group that took care of that.
So one of the issues in the produced water treatment scenario must be the care that is taken to properly dispose of this residual, which includes the filter cake that you just talked about. Is that right?
Would you mind if I reworded that to say that one of the issues should be proper disposal of any waste that's generated through the process?
And that includes the filter cake that you've just been discussing.
If a company was using a process that contributed to a filter cake, yes, you are correct.
Now fully onto your rebuttal. There's only a couple of questions left. You acknowledge that improved instrumentation and techniques will help identify molecular formulas and quantify concentrations correct?
Yes, I did.
But those instrumentalities that fully produce a toxicological profile is still at a nascent stage. Is that also correct?
And by that, allow me to state how I understand what you're saying. So currently now that is at the research level in one or more universities. So it's not to the point where it is now an accepted, say, an EPA accepted procedure. So that is correct.
On page 7, line 8, you don't have to go there, but I'm just giving you that. You say, quote, last year, using non-targeted analysis, the New Mexico Produced Water Research Consortium analyzed a thermally distilled and polished treated produced water and revealed 12 unknown or unidentifiable compounds in the distillate. My question, sir, is, was there lab analysis and research produced as a result of that treatment?
Could you rephrase that, please? I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
You discussed this research that the consortium did, and you talk about that there was a thermally distilled and polished treated produced water, which revealed 12 unknown or unidentifiable compounds in the distillate. My question to you is, was there any resulting lab analysis or research produced as a result of that?
Yes, now I understand what you're saying. So that is my understanding that they found those 12 out of the way they're processing this non-targeted analysis now and using the software databases to match it up. There was not any additional work to try to determine because that structure, that database structure did not contain those. The point I was trying to make there that of all 12, they were found in the picogram per milliliter range, which is 1/1,000,000th of a milligram per liter.
Okay, so, but what I'm asking you to focus on is,
did that generate more research?
Or was that research, where did that research go?
Okay, so this was a research that I referred to yesterday that has been presented publicly. To date, it was presented at the State of the Science Symposium, as well as a mid-year review. It is currently going through the peer review paper process now.
So do you anticipate that will, I know that you can't say for sure, but do you anticipate that will become public?
I believe that particularly if that paper, once that paper is peer reviewed and accepted and published, then it will become a public document.
Has that research been tendered to the NMED?
Let me say this. I would believe it has, but I do not know that for sure.
Now, in response to some questions, and also in your rebuttal, you complained that New Mexico Environment Department's proposed rule ban discharge of treated produced water. You complain about that, that you don't want a full discharge ban, right?
That's why I'm here today.
That's why you're here today? I hope you're here because of other things, but you provide examples from other states about discharge permits, but you would agree that none of those states have allowed treated produced water discharge from hydraulic fracking that have either saline concentrations or chemical constituents like the Permian Basin, correct?
That is correct. If by that you mean that high levels of salt were not discharged, the various, if I may step back to my testimony yesterday when I talked about the 39 constituents in the Commonwealth under their WMGR 123 Appendix A list, that the water that's being discharged there out of the Marcellus Shale, and incidentally, that water is worse than the Permian waters, but that water is being treated to that level of those constituents for discharge.
If this commission banned discharge, banned federal permits for discharge,
Yes, ma'am.
banned any reuse, but allowed the research to continue in the lab and in pilot projects, would NAMOGA appeal?
I'm just going to object to that as calls for both a legal conclusion and beyond his knowledge as to what NAMOGA would do.
What you know, I'm not asking, what you know,
Yes, ma'am.
would NAMOGA appeal?
That, to my knowledge, I cannot answer that.
Now, you testified that the feedstock for hydrogen production will need to be ultra pure water, correct?
That is correct.
It can't contain high concentrations of salt, right?
That is correct.
You agree that thus far there are no peer-reviewed scientific studies that have proven that Permian Basin produced water has achieved the ultra pure water state through desalination, purification, and polishing that is needed for green hydrogen production.
Yes, and can I elaborate on that a little bit? Mainly because there has not been a need to consider that up until this last year. There was no way that produced water would be considered for hydrogen production, or hydrogen production would be considered in mass without this Inflation Reduction Act credit. That is what is spurring the interest. And as I mentioned yesterday, the peer reviewed process, first you have to do the research to demonstrate that it can be done. Then you have to get it in the peer review process. So that tends to be typically a 1 to 2 year lag.
And so, but to date, we have no information, in fact, that it can be done.
That is correct.
Nothing further. Thank you so much. And I would move the admission of new energy economy, the same ones. I don't know if you had a chance, Madam Hearing Officer, if this is the time, but I would like to move basically new energy economy exhibit 19 through 33. All the things that haven't been admitted yet.
Okay, did you bring all these up with Mr. McCurdy? Or
No, with Mr. McCurdy, I just, other than 34 and 35, which you've already admitted, I just referred to
21, right?
Yeah. The other ones, I'm sorry if this is not the right time and we can deal with it later.
Okay.
And you should just tell me when that is, so that I'm just afraid that I'm going to forget and I don't want to.
Okay, I'll make a note and we can talk about the others. I'll pause for a moment in the event there are objections to any exhibit 21.
21.
I said that.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear that.
21. Okay, 21 is admitted. Thank you, Ms. Nanasi.
Thank you.
Let's see. Ms. Fox, do you have questions of Mr. McCurdy? All right. Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Fox, you can seat yourself there. Chair Thompson has a question while you're making your way up. Chair Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. McCurdy, Ms. Hearing Officer. The NPDES Plus list is developed by researchers at New Mexico State. Isn't that true?
That is correct. That is correct.
It is. Has that list been finalized?
I believe it has. And let me add to the last, because Ms. Nanazi had asked me, I do believe that NMED had input on that list as well.
That's my understanding as well. My understanding, it has not been finalized though. And I have correspondence from Dr. Zhu at New Mexico State that would prefer that if people want to use that list, they should contact her because it is in a state of development.
I'm sorry, sir.
The list, according to Dr. Hugh, corresponded with me a bit earlier this morning, is that list is near final, but is still under development.
That is correct. And it, just my personal opinion is that will never be a finalized list to some degree, that in the future, something else such as what we've seen with PFAS in the most recent history, something that we didn't know about was a problem now would probably be added to that.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. Ms. Fox? Oh, Ms. Fox just noted that she's going to distribute some exhibits. I think we're done shuffling.
Ready to roll. Great, thank you. Hello, Mr. McCurdy. My name is Tanis Fox. I'm a lawyer with Amigos Bravos for Amigos Bravos and Sierra Club in this proceeding. And thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
I've handed you NMED Exhibit 199, which is a produced water consortium document entitled Guidance on Treated and Untreated Produced Water Sampling Procedure.
Yes, ma'am.
Dated May 15th, 2023. I believe you referred to this you have referred to this sampling procedure both yesterday and today in your testimony.
Yes, ma'am.
And Chair Thompson just asked you a question about this procedure and the finality of it, I believe.
That is correct. And if I may make a slight clarification, while the NIPDs plus ingredients are listed in this sample procedure, I did not directly address the sample procedure. I was directing those comments toward the NPDES plus list.
And that NPDES plus list is part of the sampling procedure that you have before you, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
What is the purpose of this document?
So the purpose of this document is, as I mentioned yesterday, in order for the information gathered off of these sampling events to be relevant, that needs to be defensible data. Defensible data means that it needs to be done in accordance with NELAP accredited lab sampling and analytical procedures. This document is meant to ensure that process is followed. Certain analyses have specific requirements regarding preservation of the fluids, both from a additive standpoint, such as an acid to prevent things from coming out of solution, the addition of an acid to the sample, the color of the jar or the container that they're caught in, whether they need to be on ice, and then also specific hold times, meaning the analysis has to be run within that period or the data is invalid. This is what that document is meant to convey, that those procedures must be followed in order to gather these samples for analysis.
And how was this document developed?
So this document was developed through the consortium and it was developed through NMSU. I was not part of the team that put this document together.
That was my next question. So you've stated on a number of occasions that this document identifies some 400 analytes for testing, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you refer to the list as the NPDES plus list,
Yes,
correct?
that is correct.
why is that the name that you refer? Why is the list identified in that manner?
Because there's a specific number of analytes that most NPDES permits require for a discharge. And I don't know the exact number. I believe it's somewhere in the upper 80s or lower 90 analytes. Because this is a list of over 400, you're taking that initial NPDES list and expanding it greatly.
And what was the rationale for the expansion?
Because of the concern about what could possibly be in produced water, and that there could be components in produced water that extended outside of those traditional 89 or 90 analytes.
Were those additions based, at least in some measure, on anticipated constituents from produced water in the Permian Basin in New Mexico?
Yes, ma'am.
Does the sampling protocol require wet testing?
As far as I'm aware, it does not.
Would you take a look at page 21 of the NMED exhibit 199?
Yes.
Yes, it does require wet testing?
Yes, it does require wet testing. And for the record, can we say that means whole effluent toxicity?
Thank you. Okay, so you've identified NMOGA exhibits 75 through 127 as, quote, peer-reviewed and published papers detailing studies on treated produced water, distillate, or permeate, correct? End quote.
Yes, and I also specified that part of those exhibits were white papers, not necessarily peer-reviewed, such as the Groundwater Protection Council's white paper on produced water.
Correct. I took that, you said published papers, so maybe that falls within that.
All righty.
Maybe the Groundwater Council papers
So,
fall within
yeah.
that or not, I'm not sure,
So I'll agree with your statement.
but appreciate it. Okay, so not all the studies or articles are peer reviewed, that's established, correct?
That is correct.
You know, for example, if you look at exhibits 108 to 112, those are for self-reported bench scale studies or pilot studies from individual companies, correct?
That is correct.
And a number of the articles report on bench scale laboratory or pilot projects, correct? Versus, you know, treatment technologies that have been used at scale, at industrial scale, correct?
Yeah, I believe if I count them correctly, there's roughly five reports on bench scale pilots, and I believe a couple of those are additional final reports on those projects.
And some of the articles, for example, 81 and 82, those are reports on lab or pilot scale projects, correct?
Just a minute.
Sure.
Yes, that is correct, but I do believe they were also peer-reviewed papers. They were pilot scale projects, but they were peer-reviewed.
Correct. And not each of the 52 exhibits are reports on the efficacy of treating produced water outside the oil field, correct?
That is correct.
So for example, there's 93, which is the draft white paper between EPA and NMED from 2018.
Yes.
100 on seismicity.
Yes.
102 on water volumes and waste management practices.
Yes.
104 on regulations.
Yes.
106 public meeting PowerPoint from EPA on guidelines.
Yes.
108, again, on waste management practices.
Yes.
116, the regulatory, talking about the regulatory framework for produced water.
Yes.
117, a data set for characterization.
Yes.
And
that characterization of produced water versus water of the Pecos River.
correct, yeah. From the famous NMED Exhibit 140. It's the data set for that, yes. And then Exhibit 119 on treating produced water for use in the oil field.
Yes, and that was evidently Exhibit 119 was just a duplicate of Exhibit 118, or at least in my drop file it was.
I'm sorry, would you say that again?
Yes, so Exhibit NMOGA 119 in my Dropbox was a duplicate of Exhibit 118.
Oh, here it's listed as treatment of produced water for use within the for hydraulic fracturing fluid.
That is correct.
Rodriguez, okay.
That's the notes I have for 118.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I have that as 119.
All righty.
Okay. 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 So about 10 exhibits are not related to the efficacy of treating or produced water outside the oil field, correct?
I believe that's a fair assessment.
Okay. So for the 40 or so studies that may or may not be peer reviewed, that report on the efficacy of treating produced water for use outside the oil field, did any of those reports or studies follow the sampling procedure recommended by the Produced Water Consortium that we just discussed?
I would have to assume, and I hate using that word, that they did not, since that sampling protocol did not exist when those peer-reviewed papers were published.
And aside from those pilot project reports, those 4 or 5 so we discussed that are from companies in New Mexico that aren't peer reviewed, how many of the 40 or so studies were conducted in the Permian Basin, do you believe?
Probably out of those 40, perhaps 10 were in the Permian Basin. I know the 2 that we just referenced a while ago that I said that I believe they were peer reviewed. I believe both of those were Permian Basin waters.
Which were those?
That was now I've got to go back and remember what.
So I tell you, I can find only 3, 82, 119, and 120.
Dr. Vittix, that is correct. And you do not believe 85 is one?
I would, why don't you tell me what you believe?
Well, 85.
Okay. Yeah, in addition to 82, 119, and 20, which others were conducted in the Permian Basin in New Mexico?
I'll have to go through this whole list and review that, and if you want to. But let's assume that it's just those 4.
Okay.
Okay.
So let me see if I get your testimony correct, and you can tell me if I don't. It's my understanding from your testimony yesterday that you believe that these studies demonstrate that treated produced water can be safely discharged to surface and groundwater in New Mexico. Is that correct, or is that an overstatement?
I believe that would be an overstatement. My personal belief is that yes, we can get to that status, but I do not have the data to back up that belief as of yet.
The research is more in the preliminary stage of being able to make that conclusion. The research that you provided.
I believe perhaps some of the papers that I referenced in here would indicate that we were moving in that direction and we're in the preliminary stage. I do believe we're getting near the finish line now. We're down to, as I mentioned, that one, and granted, that was just a one mention of that one paper that we were down to 12 unknowns at the part per quadrillion range, which is very promising. But I would like to be able to say there were no unknowns in the water. And I think when, will it be a year from now? Will it be 2 years from now? I can't say, but I think we're getting near that point.
Okay. In your packet, I've given you a list of, or a number of the abstracts from these papers that I would love to read for the commission. But I see the chair shaking his head. And so, but I would, if I could, instead of going through that litany, I would commend to the commission to look at those abstracts at a minimum. And in particular, I mean, I just looked at a number last evening, 75, 78, 80, 83, 84, 89, 92, 105, 119. And they all kind of say, don't they, that this research is preliminary and we need additional research to determine the efficacy of treating produced water at scale.
If I could, clarify two of those, and also keep in mind when those papers were published. Some of those papers were somewhat new, like in the last 4 or 5 years. Some of them were perhaps 10 years old.
Well, they are your papers.
Yes, they are. But still, I wasn't submitting them to say we're there. I was submitting them to offset the idea that there was no work being done in this area, is what I was trying to say.
Understood.
And in all fairness, and I'm not being glib, I've never met a researcher yet that doesn't say we need more research.
But you seem to agree with the researchers on this point.
I do believe that we need to continue research.
So would you say that the commissioners need to critically review each of your papers to discern their content and value for purposes of this proceeding?
So I would like for the commissioners to look at those papers with the mindset of, again, versus the argument that there is no work that has been done in this area, to state, no, there is ongoing work that has been going on for the last decade or so.
You reviewed the direct testimony of NMED witness expert Dr. Lee Hu, correct?
That is correct.
Are you familiar with Dr. Hu's work?
Yes, Dr. Hu is part of the consortium, so I've seen him there on several occasions.
In his direct testimony, he discussed at some length treatment technologies for produced water, correct?
Yes.
On page 30 of his testimony, which I've provided for you in my little packet.
Can you just give me the exhibit number?
Pardon me?
Do you have the exhibit number, Dr. Who?
Yes, it's, what is it, Andrew? 5? It's Dr. Who's exhibit? Direct 5. I don't have that. I do have the reference though, Mr. Wexler, that I'm going to refer to that I've given to you.
It is exhibit 5.
Okay.
Do you mind telling me the page one more time? Sorry.
Page 30. He summarized, this is Mr. McCurdy, page 30 of his direct testimony, and refers to a report from the NMSU Civil Engineering Department, which is NMED Exhibit 139. And he says that the report concludes that while emerging technologies like high pressure reverse osmosis, membrane distillation, supercritical water desalination, or forward osmosis have the potential to significantly reduce costs, they're still in the development phase and not ready for full-scale implementation. To date, there is still a lack of robust data concerning the characterization of raw and treated produced water, treatment technologies, effluent quality, and the management of waste streams. And I take it from looking at the papers you submitted and from testimony today, you agree with Dr. Hughes' summary in that regard?
Yes, ma'am, I would agree with the summary. And as I said, many of the technologies that he mentions here, and I think I mentioned this earlier today, do not exist at scale today. They exist at perhaps in a pilot scale process, but not in a larger scale, like a 10,000 barrel a day. They're just not there yet.
And remind me, I got lost in the numbers yesterday. Pilot scale, what quantities are we talking about?
So if I may ask the chairman, what was the, starts with a D, deliverable? Demonstration, thank you. Trying to, again, and I do agree that we need to get a definition down for each one of these. Bench scale would be something that's done in a laboratory, typically generally less than 1 barrel per day. Usually it's in the gallons per day type test. A pilot scale would be something larger, say up to 50 or 100 barrels per day that can be taken to the field. And then demonstration would be another, say, order of magnitude above that, to where now we're up at 1,000 or 2,000 barrels per day. Because from that scale, we would feel confident that those economics would carry on to a larger version. There's only a few of those demonstration projects underway now. There are none of the full-scale projects underway.
And so what you just told me was that these studies were at the bench or pilots level.
There are, well, obviously a lot of the papers that were presented in here, a lot of that was bench scale work. There are pilot opportunities, which that was some of the papers you referenced regarding the companies that had submitted stuff. And as I said, there's maybe 1 or 2 out there now that are in the demonstration project status, but there have not been any papers published about those.
So Dr. Who concludes on that same page 30 of NMED Exhibit 5, that quote, given the variability and unknowns, the department has determined that allowing the discharge of treated or untreated produced water into the environment is premature and cannot currently be done in a way that complies with the Water Quality Act, correct? That's what he says?
That is what he says. That is correct.
So I'm not going to ask you whether you agree with Dr. Who's conclusion, but given the current state of our knowledge, can you understand why Dr. Hugh, as someone who's charged with protecting public health and the environment for New Mexico, would conclude that discharge of treated and untreated produced water into the environment is premature and wouldn't comply with the Water Quality Act at this point in time?
And for the record, I'm not disagreeing with that statement, nor am I.
I should have asked you for your opinion.
You should have asked me. And nor am I asking the commission today to approve discharge. What I'm asking is to not place a ban on discharge. It would have to take time to repeal at a later date. We believe that their current regulations allow NMED to prevent any possible discharge under existing regulations. Therefore, a ban is not needed.
But you understand that if there isn't a prohibition on discharge, entities could apply for a discharge permit.
That is correct.
Yesterday, you referred to an article authored by Dr. Danforth.
Yes.
And others, NMED Exhibit 133, an integrated method for identification and prioritization of constituents of concern in produced water from onshore oil and gas extraction, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And that's the article that identified 1,198 potential constituents in produced water, correct?
That is correct.
You pointed out that the article is based on a literature review in which a particular constituent only had to be identified one time to be included in that list, correct?
That is correct.
And it's been pointed out that that article is not Permian Basin specific, correct?
That is correct.
So I've given you page 4 on that article and highlighted a section, and I'm going to paraphrase from that highlighted section on page 4. Based on the literature search, a total of 15,661 records were returned, with an additional 33 studies identified through review articles. These papers detailed chemical analysis for 173 sources of produced water by state and hydrocarbon development type, collected from 27 locations in North America, 24 states in the USA, 2 Canadian provinces, and 1 Mexican state. The majority of produced water reported in these studies was sourced from unconventional developments. Produced water collected from conventional developments and coal bed methane were represented more similarly. The source of produced water in these studies was predominantly from the Marcellus Basin in Pennsylvania, even though the majority of produced water volume is generated in areas such as Texas, California, and New Mexico. Is that paraphrasing fairly accurate?
Yes, it is. And to be clear, she's making 2 different statements there. One is that the majority of the constituents listed in this data came out of water from the Marcellus that was analyzed. The second statement isn't reflecting that these other areas provided constituents into this. She's just stating that the vast majority of produced water comes from these other areas.
So she notes that, this was this expansive literature search, right? And that even though a majority of the produced water comes from states like Texas, New Mexico, and California, that's not where the data comes from, correct?
That is correct.
So, and is that because most of the literature on characterization of produced water is from the Marcellus Basin and not from Texas, California, and New Mexico?
That is correct, because once the Marcellus play became a major unconventional play in the U.S., and by far the largest on a geographic basis, covering 3 states, it garnered a lot of attention, particularly from NGOs, which prompted a lot of papers, a lot of research into this water, how harmful could it be, and we saw just floods of peer-reviewed papers coming out of that area. And by we, I mean industry.
So what are the most respected or preeminent peer-reviewed articles on characterization of produced water in the Permian Basin in New Mexico?
To my knowledge, I have not seen any that would rise to this level that Dr. Danforth and crew did in this paper.
Are you familiar with NMED Exhibit 140, which is entitled Characterization of Produced Water and Surrounding Surface Water in the Permian Basin? We've talked about 140 a lot.
Yes.
You are familiar with that?
I have seen this paper, yes.
Okay, and that was a study, and I've given you an excerpt from that paper as well.
You have.
And that was a study of produced water from 5 locations, which included 46 samples, correct?
Yes, and I apologize. I would have to run through my list, but I do believe this paper was one of my exhibits as well.
You had 117, you had the data set from it.
Oh, from it, but not the paper. Okay, thank you.
And then the study also included one sample or sample from one location from the Pecos River that collected 10 samples, correct?
I believe that is correct, yes.
So that's a pretty limited sample size across the entirety of the Permian Basin in New Mexico, correct?
That would be a correct statement, yes.
And looking at the part that I highlighted in the article on page 2, you could look at that.
Yes.
And then I'll ask you a question rather than to read it for the commission. Did you read the highlighted portion?
Oh, yes, ma'am, I did. I'm sorry.
Okay. So the conclusion there's sort of a discussion about the characterization in the Permian Basin. And the conclusion is thus comprehensive chemical characterization and risk assessment of produced water is necessary for potential treatment and beneficial use outside the oil and gas field in the Permian Basin. I take it based on what we've been discussing today and what you've been discussing throughout your testimony, you agree with that statement?
I do agree with that statement, yes.
Ms. Fox, we need a break soon. Would you identify a good stopping point?
We can now. I have a little bit to go, but
All right.
yeah, thank you.
Let's take 15 minutes, come back at 10:50. Let's come back from the break, please. Okay, we have the witness and his counsel. Ms. Fox?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Mr. McCurdy, so back to Dr. Dan Force article,
Yes.
which is NMED Exhibit 133. And I've given you an excerpt, a highlighted excerpt from that article from page 4. And she says, they say, the comprehensive literature search, a total of 1,198 unique chemicals, were identified as having been detected in produced water. Of these, 296 chemicals satisfied the additional criteria of being detected more than once and having associated concentration data. 122 chemicals had the further criteria of having at least 2 types of toxicity data. Do you see that?
I'm looking here. Okay, very good, because we were up here and now we're down here at the bottom. Yes, I do see that. Thank you.
So almost 300 of those chemicals were detected more than once and had concentration data, correct?
That is correct.
What does it mean to have concentration data?
Means that they had been analyzed and given a number, such as part per million or part per billion.
And over 120 of the chemicals had the additional criterion of having at least 2 types of toxicity data, correct?
That is correct.
And what does it mean to have toxicity data?
That means that through a search, they've seen that that particular chemical has shown up in a toxicity study at some point in time and has been given a value as to where it rates on the scale for toxicity.
Okay, you have what was admitted as ABSC Exhibit 11 in your packet.
Oh.
I believe. Maybe I forgot that one. There it is.
Can you tell me that, is it the EDF? Or can you tell me
Yes.
11? Okay.
Sorry, I tried to put those in order. So the ABSC Exhibit 11 is a December 9th, 2020 letter to the Environment Department from the Environmental Defense Fund, and the first signatory is Dr. Danforth.
That is correct.
And in that letter, Dr. Danforth and her colleagues identify 180 known produced water constituents that, 1, have a standard approved analytical method currently available, 2, do not currently have New Mexico numeric surface water quality standards, and 3, have some toxicity data available. And there's a chart of those 180 constituents at the end of the letter.
I do see that, yes.
What does it mean to have a standard approved analytical method?
That means that through research, and in my understanding correctly, and through work done with an accredited NELAP lab, they have developed that, yes, we can detect this within a certain amount of surety to a certain standard for that product.
Do you have any reason to doubt the finding that there are 180 such constituents?
I have no reason to doubt that. I believe, as we've talked about during the testimony, that we do realize that there are many lacking analytical procedures for a lot of these products in a high salt matrix. And I believe that's what they're referring to now, is that there's not a approved procedure for a high salt matrix for these particular analytes.
And that there's no numeric surface water quality standard for those constituents in New Mexico.
I would believe that is correct, looking at the list.
Of these 180 potential produced water constituents, to your knowledge, has NMOGA done any analysis of which of these is likely to be present in the Permian Basin in New Mexico?
So now that I'm looking at the list, and forgive me, I have an old man's eyes, so they're quite a small print. I don't understand the point. There are numerous of these, and I'm looking on the last 2 pages, which there are known analytical procedures, and they do exist under guidelines for discharge, such as an example, fluoride, sodium, those exist.
Those exist in the New Mexico surface water quality standards?
Should be, yes.
Should, or you know they do?
I do not know that they do it, not because I do not have that in front of me.
Do you know, to your knowledge, has NMOGA done any analysis to determine whether of these 180 constituents, whether they are likely, which ones are likely to be in produced water from the Permian Basin in New Mexico?
No, I'm not aware of those studies.
And in this proceeding, NMOGA.
Would you allow me to clarify that a little bit? As far as official NMOGA analysis, no, I do not aware that exists. There are various members of NMOGA who are doing analytical work. I'm not saying that all of these 180 are being performed, but several of them are, such as the 2 I just mentioned.
Thank you.
Okay.
And NMOGA hasn't proposed any standards for discharge for any of those 180 constituents in this proceeding, correct?
No, I do not believe NMOGA has proposed standards.
And do you understand that NMOGA can propose such standards in a rulemaking petition before the commission?
I would state that I'm not aware if that's a possibility or not.
In response to testimony from Mr. D'Antonio, Mr. Herman from NMED responded on page 10 of his rebuttal testimony. I'm not sure I provided that. I don't think I did. I'm just going to read it to you. Or if you'd like to find it, that's fine.
If you would like to expedite, you can read it.
Yeah, you can understand it, I think. Okay. It's on page 10 of his rebuttal testimony. He says, lastly, the department does not agree with Mr. D'Antonio's assertion that it should have included standards for discharge of produced water in the proposed regulations. The department has made every effort to obtain research, data, produce water samples, and other information in order to promulgate such standards, but has received almost nothing from industry proponents who are pushing for the discharge of treated produced water. Based on your personal knowledge, do you have any basis to disagree with that testimony from Mr. Herman that NMED has not received sufficient information from industry to promulgate such standards?
So the way that statement is made, I would agree with that statement. I would clarify it by saying industry was not aware that NMED was expecting us to provide them with that analytical data. It was our understanding that this would be done through the consortium. And NMED has had access to all the research data that the consortium has put together to date.
In your direct and rebuttal testimony, you discuss a number of examples in which states allow discharge of produced water, correct?
That is correct.
And
Or have allowed.
Right. And those include Wyoming,
Yes.
which you have acknowledged has produced water that's relatively low in TDS, and that's been used for agriculture and as a water source for livestock and wildlife.
Yes, ma'am.
And in Arkansas, where there's an NPDES permit issue, but that is no longer in effect, correct?
That is correct.
In Pennsylvania, where produced water, treated produced water has been discharged to a river, correct?
Yes, and that is ongoing.
California, that allows application of treated produced water for irrigation, but it can't include produced water that has been subject to hydraulic fracturing.
That is correct.
And there's one approved NPDES permit in Texas, correct?
That is correct for South Texas.
So in your testimony, you don't cite any peer-reviewed research that evaluates the human or environmental risks associated with those examples, do you?
No, ma'am, I do not.
In your direct testimony, you discuss the guidelines developed in Texas by the Texas Railroad Commission for, quote, small-scale applications of treated produced water for agricultural pilot projects, end quote, correct?
That is correct.
So I've handed out to you what's called the Produced Water Beneficial Reuse Framework for pilot study authorization by the Railroad Commission dated January 8th, 2024. Are these the guidelines that for pilot projects in Texas that you refer to?
Yes, they are.
Now, under those guidelines, the treated produced water used in small scale applications in Texas, quote, must not contact groundwater or surface water, correct?
That is correct.
And Madam Hearing Officer, I've marked ABSC Exhibit 15, which are excerpts from that guidance document with the pertinent language that I just cited that says that pilot projects must not contact groundwater or surface water.
The commission and I have that.
Thank you. In your testimony, you don't cite to any published results from the Texas Produced Water Consortium on the efficacy of treatment and beneficial use of produced water, do you?
No, I do not.
In your direct and oral testimony, you discuss the work of the Colorado Produced Water Consortium, correct?
That is correct.
And as a matter of fact, you are one of 4 industry representatives on that 33-person consortium, correct?
That is correct.
You acknowledge in your direct testimony that and you did yesterday, that the consortium's primary focus is to maximize the reuse of produced water in oil and gas operations, correct?
That is correct.
And you cite to the legislation that enabled and enacted that consortium in 2023, correct?
That is correct.
And is that House Bill 23-1242?
I will take your word for it. I do not recall off the top.
Well, you can also look in the packet.
All right.
And
that would be 23.
That would be AB Exhibit 16. Entitled House Bill 23-1242. Is that the piece of Colorado legislation that established the Colorado Produced Water Consortium?
Yes, ma'am.
You're familiar with this bill?
Not in its entirety, but yes.
But you're familiar with it?
I'm familiar with
generally?
Yes.
Thank you. There's a legislative finding on page 2 that quote, one way to conserve water is by increasing the recycling of produced water in oil and gas operations, correct?
That is correct.
And on that same page, the bill requires the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission to adopt new rules, quote, to require a rapid and substantial reduction of the use of fresh water and the increase in recycling of produced water in oil and gas operations, correct?
Right.
And so, as you've testified to, the emphasis right now in Colorado is on conservation of freshwater resources in oil and gas operations and reuse of produced water within the oil field, not reuse outside the oil field, correct?
That is correct. If I can make one clarification, Colorado has 4 basic production basins. The Piceance Basin over on the western side of California has been doing reuse for a number of years. So that's really not what's being addressed by this. It's now the predominant developmental area is the DJ Basin, which is roughly runs northeast from Denver. And that's where it's mostly using freshwater.
Are you aware that the state Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department wanted legislation to be proposed for the 2024 legislative session that happened early this year to limit the use of fresh water in oil and gas operations within the oil field? And industry opposed those limitations?
Objection relevance. I'm not sure why it matters what the department wanted. Nothing's ever adopted in the legislature. It has no tendency to disprove a fact at issue.
Ms. Fox? There has been a lot of testimony and public comment in this proceeding about the lengths to which the industry has gone to conserve fresh water. And so I think it is relevant to all that testimony that in fact, maybe industries, maybe those representations are somewhat exaggerated.
All right, overruled, if you know.
So let me start out by saying I'm not a government affairs specialist. That's not my area of expertise. So the reason that I would believe that industry would push back on that immediate, the current regulations within the state of Colorado do not allow for substantial volumes of reuse, particularly in the Denver-Julesburg Basin, the DJ Basin. Therefore, if you said you must stop using fresh water immediately, then you shut down operations until a time that these regulations could be adjusted. Industry was in favor of the consortium's approach, which would be a detailed look at what needed to be done to allow, industry is in favor of reducing freshwater use and increasing produced water use, but we simply cannot do it under the existing regulations.
Are you aware of industry's opposition, however, to legislation that would have statutorily placed certain limits on the use of fresh water in the oil field?
For the way they were originally written, which would have had to been done without another avenue to provide produced water in to replace that fresh water, then industry would have been opposed to that.
Is that a hypothetical situation, or are you talking about the actual proposal put forth by the state agency?
That would be, I have not read that proposal from that state agency, to be fair.
So that's a hypothetical.
Hypothetical.
So yesterday, I believe you testified that the Colorado consortium is behind New Mexico or something to that effect, the New Mexico consortium. But perhaps Colorado simply has a different paradigm or framework than New Mexico, and that is to first maximize conservation of fresh water by oil and gas and maximize reuse of produced water within the oil field prior to reuse outside the oil field because of the potential environmental and human health benefits.
So to be fair, ma'am, that is actually being behind. If we look back as far as 10 years ago, the predominant water used in the Permian Basin for completions was fresh water. So industry has moved during that period to an area to where predominantly we're using produced water for completions. We haven't eliminated fresh water. New Mexico almost has. I believe the last number I saw was only completions only contain 3% fresh water on average. Texas is not meeting that match just because of water ownership regulations in Texas and mandated sales of fresh water. Different story. Colorado, when I say they're behind, is because they have not moved to that stage yet to where they've allowed the industry to move to that sort of reuse. I'll point again to the fact that there are regulations on the book that restrict the ability to reuse produced water in the DJ Basin.
And when you use the term fresh water, are you referring to water that's less than 1,000 milligrams per liter TDS?
That is generally the definition I use, yes.
And you're probably aware then that the definition for fresh water in New Mexico under the Oil Conservation Commission's regulations is 10,000 milligrams per liter TDS, correct?
I was not aware of that. Most people consider that 1 to 10 being a brackish water.
Now, the Colorado Consortium is made up of representatives from state and federal agencies, research institutions, state institutions of higher education, affected and interested non-governmental organizations, local governments, affected industries, environmental justice organizations, and disproportionately impact community members, correct?
That is correct.
And you identify that industry has 4 seats of in the 33 seats of the commission, correct?
Industry actually has 8 seats. There are 1 seat each for a industry representative from one of the 4 basins. And then there are 4 additional seats, which are not necessarily industry, but there were people that were identified as having expertise and experience in produced water. That is one of the seats I hold.
That's not an industry seat per se, though.
It doesn't have to be. It could be a consultant that works with produced water, for example.
Now, the company you work for, Select Water Solutions, is a member of the New Mexico Consortium, correct?
That is correct.
And you are their representative at the consortium, correct?
That is correct.
So if you will look at what was marked ABSC Exhibit 17, which is a response from the New Mexico State University to an inspection of public records request that I sent asking for a membership list of the consortium.
Yes.
And if you will look on page 3 of that document, which is entitled NMPR PWRC Memberships 7/24/24.
Yes.
Does this look like a fairly accurate list of consortium members from New Mexico?
I am going to assume it does. Many of these, yes, I am aware because they actively participate in the working groups. Some of the names I do not recognize anybody that actually actively participates, but I'm not going to question that they're not a member.
Do you think the list is fairly accurate?
Yes, I do believe that.
And so the New Mexico Produced Water Consortium is predominantly made up of industry representatives, correct?
Yeah, I believe that would be a fair statement.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. McCurdy. I move for admission of ABSC exhibits 15, 16, and 17.
We'll pause for the moment in the event there are objections.
Madam Hearing Office.
Commissioner Brankert.
We had a lot of discussion about the what is excerpted in Exhibit 15. I'm wondering if it would be better if we had the entire document made an exhibit. It's 26 pages, so it's not like it's voluminous.
All right, Ms. Fox. Would you be willing to provide that?
I'd be glad to. I was just trying to limit the numbers of pages for the commission, but I'd be glad to put the entire document into evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
So I have no objection to 15 if the rule of completeness is followed. Exhibit 16, I wasn't clear if this was an act that had actually been passed or not. I'm not sure.
It's signed by the governor.
This version is signed. So then we have no objection to 16. 17, I mean, the witness was marginally familiar with the company list. I think he said probably accurate.
Fairly was the question.
And then there's a couple other pages here. I mean, page 1 and 2. I don't know what the relevance of any of that is. But we'll object to exhibit 17 as unreliable.
Ms. Fox.
Well, Mr. McCurdy did testify that it was a fairly accurate list of consortium members, and you can see by the email exchange that that list, I think, was specifically updated for my request, which was kind of them to do. It's dated July 24th, 2024. Would have gotten a list from the consortium website. Mr. Hightower testified that a list of members is on that website, but I don't think that that is accurate. So I could not get a list, from the website. So this is the best I could do.
Yeah, I would say the email correspondence is a good indicia of its reliability, and I know that it's dated within the last 2 weeks.
No real way of testing who these people are or what. I mean, it's an email from someone who's not testifying.
I understand. I still think it looks reliable. So AB, SC 15, 16, and 17 are admitted, and Ms. Fox will provide the entirety of Exhibit 15.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Thank you, Commissioner. Again, thank you.
Mr. Knight, do you have questions of Mr. McCurdy?
Good morning. Good morning, sir. Mr. McCurdy, I believe you stated in your testimony that the New Mexico Environment Department could simply deny an application for a discharge permit for the discharge of treated produced water, for instance, if we were to conclude that the discharge would not be protective ground or surface water. Is that correct?
That is, yes, that's what I testified.
Do you recall Mr. Jason Herman's testimony on the first couple of days of this hearing regarding the process for denying permits under the Water Quality Act and this commission's regulations?
No, sir.
Are you familiar with the language in the New Mexico Water Quality Act, which was filed as New Mexico Environment Department Exhibit 17? Language in our Water Quality Act regarding discharge permits?
No, sir.
Believe this commission is fairly familiar with that, but I will provide the site of that. And again, it is New Mexico Environment Department Exhibit 17. Again, to save time, I'm referring to New Mexico statutes annotated 7465E, and that is a part of the Water Quality Act that states the conditions under which the department could deny a discharge permit. And would you be able to bring that up, Mr. Wexler, either, New Mexico Environment Department Exhibit 17?
All right, and could you cite the location again, please?
I'm sorry.
Could you cite the location again, please, that you were
Yeah,
referencing?
that is NMSA 7465E.
E. Okay. I have that up, sir.
Could you read the text right after the letter E?
It reads, the constituent agency shall deny any application for a permit or deny the certification of a federal water quality permit if, one, the effluent would not meet applicable state or federal effluent regulations, standards, performance, or limitations. Two, any provision of the Water Quality Act would be violated. Three, the discharge would cause or contribute to water contaminant levels in excess of any state or federal standard. Determination of the discharge's effect on groundwater shall be measured at any place of withdrawal of water for present or reasonable foreseeable future use. Determination of the discharge effect on surface water shall be measured at the point of discharge or.
That's fine. I think so. Those first three items, I think are the only ones relevant here. Again, presuming the applicant is not a convicted felon or has been involved in a crime of moral turpitude. But my question is, let's see, let's go back to my question. Are there constituents in produced water beyond those that you presented in your testimony yesterday morning?
Beyond the 400 plus list that I identified, to the best of my knowledge, that is the extent of the list that we have available of what could possibly be in produced water now.
Would you agree, based on your testimony, that there are constituents of concern in produced water from the Permian that are not listed in federal or state effluent limits?
Yes, I would agree to that.
And are there toxicological studies that you are aware of to indicate that at least some of these constituents may cause harm to human health or the environment?
There are studies underway, and I do believe some exist for some of those compounds, yes.
So given that there are constituents in produced water from the Permian specifically that pose harm but are not currently regulated, the conditions for denial that you read under subsection E of the Water Quality Act would not be applicable. And would you agree with that statement?
Object, that calls for a legal confusion.
Sure. Okay. But let me ask the question this way. Would you agree that it is certainly possible that the department would not have a legal basis under the Water Quality Act to deny an application for a discharge permit for produced water, and that we would in fact be legally forced to issue a permit for something we knew was not protected?
Same objection.
Right. So, Mr. McCurdy, I understand you're not a lawyer. However, you are someone to whom regulations like these apply or that you are advising clients about. So if you can answer the question again, understanding you're not a lawyer, please go ahead.
So yes, what I believe you're asking me is we have a known list of state and federal standards for discharge that contain a given number of constituents. I believe earlier I said for discharge, it's likely somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 constituents. But we're testing for 400 plus constituents in produced water. And your concern is there could be one of those constituents outside of the known list, and you would have no way of preventing that permit because perhaps the known list was met.
Correct.
Right. So if you're asking me if I would agree that we would need to expand criteria to include those other ones, I would say yet is likely a possibility if they were known to be found in the treated produced water.
Thank you. Let's see. Let's talk about the pilot projects. Again, does the rule as proposed by the department, in your opinion, does that proposed rule provide for opportunity to conduct pilot projects without impacting ground or surface waters?
They do. They allow for us to go in and do what we refer to as a closed loop pilot, where we do whatever technology is needed, yet we grab samples on the downstream side of that technology for analysis, then recombine those waters back together and dispose of them via conventional means for produced water. So that does exist.
In your testimony, you discussed how methods to produce hydrogen from treated so-called ultra pure, or as you described it, ultra pure water. Is that right?
That is correct.
And as we've heard, isn't the predominant volume of produced water that's being discussed for potential reuse originating from unconventional wells in the southeastern part of New Mexico?
That is also correct.
To your knowledge, has industry identified a complete treatment train for Permian Basin produced water that would result in so-called ultra pure water?
So, as I mentioned in my testimony, in the little diagram I had that where we had reverse osmosis as the first piece for an ultra pure process, we have identified a treatment train that would get Permian Basin produced water to the quality that you would expect out of a reverse osmosis unit. Therefore, and this is maybe me talking, because as I stated earlier, this has not been done yet. That water could then be processed through electrodeionization and get to the ultra pure status.
So do you have raw and treated produced water lab analysis that conforms with the Produced Water Consortium guidelines to back any of this up?
Yes, the consortium has done testing on highly treated and polished produced water that demonstrates that the quality of water coming off of that treatment train would be acceptable to go into this process.
And does that lab analysis conform with the Produced Water Consortium's guidelines of NPDES plus list, so-called wet testing and non-targeted analysis?
So it does. Everything has been run through that NPDES plus list. I will qualify this, but I'm not aware if wet testing has been done, because it wasn't the application I'm talking about would not be discharged to a surface water.
To your knowledge, has any oil and gas entity or produced water recycling facility ever provided a complete characterization of raw produced water from the Permian Basin in order to determine the efficacy of a treatment train?
So everything, as I said earlier, that data has been generated. The pilot studies being done. The New Mexico Consortium has been invited to sample those. One of the issues that industry always has is if we go out and do all that data gathering and pay for that analysis, then generally people believe it's biased. Therefore, we prefer a third party handle that. And so most of the work to date's been done predominantly through the New Mexico Consortium. The Texas Consortium just recently this year started doing some of that analytical work. Historically to date, most of it's been done through the New Mexico Consortium.
But that, as we sit here today, that data has not been provided to the New Mexico Environment Department. Is that correct?
If you're saying it hasn't, I have no way to dispute that. I know what data I've seen through the consortium, of which NMED has several representatives on the working groups as well.
Has any entity provided a complete analysis of a treatment train for the entire treatment process and the efficacy at each step from raw produced water characterization to the end product being deionized water?
I am aware of the one that I just mentioned. Most recently, the one that was sampled and went through a pre-treatment distillation step and then a robust polishing process on the end. Other ones, I'm not aware if they went to the full train process yet. Some had pre-treatment on the front, some had distillation. They may have not have had piloting or polishing on the end, excuse me. Polishing on the end usually involves removing volatile organic compounds that made it through the distillation along with the water vapor. And that analysis was provided to indicate that those, for example, ammonia made it through, but they never went ahead with a second step to show that they could remove ammonia.
I'm sorry, could you say that last part again?
So that during that testing process, they tested through the distillation phase and gathered data for that. But for that particular treatment train, they did not have a polishing step on the final end, therefore, and they never ran that test.
And I understand that NMOCA opposes the prohibition on discharges in the proposed rule, but isn't it true that the proposed rule would allow research and pilot projects to continue in New Mexico as they have been?
That is my understanding, yes.
And I think you testified that the Texas Railroad Commission requires a costly and resource-intensive full analytical characterization for all of the constituents that are listed in the Railroad Commission's document titled Produced Water Beneficial Reuse Framework for Pilot Study Authorization. That document is NMED Exhibit 187. I believe you testified that the Railroad Commission requires that complete analytical characterization just to apply for a permit to conduct a pilot project. Is that your understanding?
That is correct.
Does the proposed rule, as proposed by the department, does it require this initial testing prior to conducting a pilot project?
To be honest, I'm not aware if it does or not.
And again, I understand you're testifying today as a witness for NMOCA, but if you know, could you tell me whether Select Water has applied for a pilot project under the Texas Railroad Commission's process?
Yes, sir, we have.
And
let me clarify that. Select Water has not applied. As I mentioned, I believe yesterday in testimony, the way the Railroad Commission's process is set up, they prefer that the landowner make the application. In the project that we are focused on, the landowner happens to be the operator we are working at, so that operator has applied for that permit.
Thank you for that. Has Select Water applied for conducting any pilot projects in New Mexico?
Not yet. We're working through some technology issues and we're waiting to have something that's ready to come to the field.
You stated that the Railroad Commission granted their first authorization 1 year ago. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that's correct. It was in the summer of last year.
And only one other authorized project has been carried out under the Railroad Commission. Is that your understanding?
That is my understanding as well.
But just to apply for one of these pilot projects, there's an application fee of $15,000. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct.
And how much would it cost for an interested party to submit a notice of intent for a pilot project in New Mexico?
I'm not aware of that cost.
Do you know if New Mexico has again, under the proposed rule, and you have reviewed the proposed rule, correct?
Yes, sir.
Are you aware of any limit on the size, duration, or volume for pilot projects in the proposed rule?
No, sir.
So would it be plausible to argue that the NOI process in our proposed rule is promotes research in New Mexico as opposed to in Texas because there aren't these costly application requirements for analysis or restrictions on size and duration of projects?
From that standpoint, the way you word that correctly, the one difference being is Texas is allowing for ground application to where we can do crop studies, range grass studies and things of that nature. Whereas under the existing rule, the way it's written now, we would not be able to do that in New Mexico.
What activities exactly does the Texas Railroad Commission authorization cover? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Strictly land applications, small scale, typically less than 5 acres or 5 acres or less land application.
So it is for a land application of treated produced water. Is that right?
That is correct. And there are requirements for barriers to prevent runoff from moving to surface water.
Does the Railroad Commission authorization take into account potential discharges to groundwater?
Yes, that is, you are not allowed to discharge groundwater. As I just said, you have to provide a plot showing elevation changes on the low end side of the 5 acres. You have to make arrangements to berm that area to where in the event of rainfall, that treated produced water, should it be being applied at the time, and not make its way off the side.
Is the Railroad Commission authorization the same as a Texas pollutant discharge elimination system permit for discharge to surface water?
No, sir.
Does the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ, isn't that the entity that issues the Texas pollutant discharge elimination system permit?
Yes, sir, you are correct.
So in reality, there are 2 regulatory agencies for produced water discharges in Texas, the Railroad Commission and TCEQ. Is that correct?
That is correct. And it is, I believe I stated yesterday, I believe that is a current understanding between the 2 regulatory bodies. And that could possibly change in the future if we move to larger scale. If these pilot projects showed, well, it looks like this can be done safely without any harm. Now we're going to go irrigate a section of land. I'm not for sure that TCEQ wouldn't come back in and say, now you're getting into a volume that we need to regulate.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to, let's talk about data. You were discussing a data portal in your testimony. Do you recall that?
Yes.
What data is currently on the data portal that you have been discussing?
Do you mind if I refresh myself?
Please.
And the reason I'm pausing is are you referring to the consortium's data portal or the state's data portal?
I believe the one you were discussing, I believe, was the consortium's data portal.
And as I'm aware of that. I just didn't remember discussing that in my testimony. Was that in my direct or rebuttal?
I believe it was an answer to some other cross-examination question.
All right, so I am aware of the data portal. Typically what that is, it is not that comprehensive list. It's asking for generic characterization from water across the state of New Mexico so that we have an idea of which water may be more suitable to desalinization. Typically lower TDS water you can desalinate much more or much less expensively than you can a higher TDS, and you can get a better recovery. So that's the purpose of that data portal. to start pulling in water analysis from different areas. It's designed to where you can designate that water as to how comprehensive that analysis is. Also, it's designed to where you can designate whether or not it was gathered through defensible methods or if it was gathered through just a typical oil field water analysis method.
To your knowledge, is all the data on the water portal available to the public?
I believe it's supposed to be available to the public. Yes, I do.
Mr. Knight,
Yes.
one of the commissioners noticed that the Texas document was already identified as NMED Exhibit 187. In case that helps.
Okay. Yes. Well, aren't there, let's see, aren't you aware that there are tiers of data on and that only tiers 1 and 2 are available to the public and tiers 3 and 4 are not?
No, sir, I was not aware of that.
Okay. And I guess I think your testimony, if I'm correct, was that you felt that the data should be available to the public. Is that your testimony?
Yes, I do not believe there should not be an issue with transparency in this process. That when we start hiding data, then the public doesn't trust what we're doing. So we are to make that data available. Now, keep in mind the data that's going into that water data portal, excuse me for being redundant, that is all raw produced water. None of the data going in there is the data from the various treatment train processes.
Do you know how many pilot projects or demonstration projects or bench scale projects have been conducted in New Mexico?
Through the consortium or outside of the consortium? Outside of the consortium, I have no idea.
Okay, within the consortium.
Within the consortium, I remember the number correctly, and I probably have it wrong. I think we're in excess of 20.
And do you know how many of these projects have been completed?
I believe roughly, I don't know that, well, there's samples that have been gathered recently on at least 1 or 2. So I think most of the rest of them have been completed or in the near final report stage.
But you don't seem to know for sure, is that right?
I know several of them have been completed and final reports available, and those are, I do believe, on the consortium's website. I'm unsure of how many have not had final reports written or where we're at in the process on analysis and reports for the last couple.
Is the progress of these projects discussed during the monthly consortium meetings?
Yes, they are.
Let's see. Have you had the opportunity to read New Mexico Environment Department's direct and rebuttal testimony regarding the pilot projects being conducted in New Mexico?
Yes, sir, I believe I have.
Do you have any reason to disagree with the number of projects or the status of projects as described in our direct and rebuttal testimony?
As testified, I believe that I felt like the number of projects were underestimated or undercounted. There seems to be a consensus that there's not significant data or not a fair amount of data out there, and perhaps there's not any that's been published. But as I stated earlier, the members that work on the working groups need the same amount of data that the rest of us do.
Of the completed projects that you're aware of, where is the data for these completed projects?
That data can be found on the website.
And again, some of that is publicly available and some is not.
That is correct. There is a public window into the, and I believe for it to go on the public database, if I remember the process correctly, not only is it completed, but it has to be reviewed by the consortium members and then agreed to put out on the public site. Otherwise, that's still under review, that's in process, that is in the members only portion of the site.
See, you mentioned You mentioned the guidance for the consortium, correct? That includes sampling for constituents under NPDES plus list, wet testing, and non-targeted analysis, correct?
That is correct.
The guidance states that raw produced water, treatment methodologies, and treated effluent quality would be analyzed and provided to NMAD, correct?
That is correct, with the exception of treatment methodology wouldn't necessarily be analyzed. You would just explain or diagram out how the treatment train was going to operate. The other two instances, both raw and treated water, yes.
And if you know, or to the extent you know, how many samples of raw produced water do you know of that have been analyzed according to those guidelines you have testified to?
To be honest with you, I don't know what that exact number is.
Do you know how many treated produced water samples have been analyzed? Withdraw that question. Why are there, well, first of all, is it your opinion that the analysis that's been conducted to date has been sufficient to base a regulatory standard off of?
With the one exception of I really would like to see us close this loop on these unknown unknowns.
And do you have any basis to say that the sampling and analysis that's been performed so far is representative of the entire Permian Basin?
Most of the work, well, as I've stated earlier, obviously the Permian Basin has numerous producing zones in it, correct? But the vast majority of focus these days are on these unconventional reservoirs, both in the Midland and Delaware basins. So the vast majority of the work's being done on predominantly what is the Wolfberry and the Wolfcamp benches. So that's predominantly what's being looked at right now. But then again, most of the other zones, particularly conventional production, that water is typically either used for enhanced oil recovery, so not necessarily going to disposal. So it's the water that we are looking at today is the water that's currently going to disposal. And I hope that didn't sound like a circular answer.
No, I think that's fine. Let's see. I believe in your testimony, you mentioned that, or you asserted that the department had failed to evaluate data from the Zhang paper you were referring to.
Yes.
And you're aware that NMED actually has provided two papers by Zhang, identified as NMED exhibits 126 and 140.
Okay.
Were you not aware of that?
No, sir.
Okay. I just wanted to see if I could understand which of those two papers you were referring to when you made that statement.
Can we pull those up?
What number are you asking him about?
When he made the statement that he stated his belief that the department had, I believe his statement was that the department had failed to evaluate the data from Zhang's paper. I'm wondering which of those two papers he was referring to in that statement.
So what was that last one you just pulled up? Because I believe the last one was one that dealt with non-targeted analysis.
This is Jay.
Oh, okay.
What department exhibit numbers are you referring to?
126 and 140.
It wasn't that one. To be honest with you, sir, I don't remember criticizing the department on either one of those papers. I'm not saying that I didn't, but I do not remember that.
Okay, that's fine. Well, let's talk about let's talk about Zhang's paper on the one on characterization of produced water and surrounding surface water in the Permian Basin.
Yes, sir.
And do you have that?
It's pulled up in front of me, yes.
You are aware that this paper also allows for access to the supplemental data via a link within the paper itself. Is that right? I'm not asking you to go there. I'm just asking if you're aware that there is a link within that paper that allows you to access the supplemental.
No,
data.
sir, I was not aware of that.
Okay. But let's see. You would agree with me. You would agree with me that the Delaware Basin is within the Permian Basin, correct?
That is correct.
And you would agree that in this paper, approximately 46 samples were analyzed.
That's what it appears to show, yes.
And of those 46 samples, approximately 36 are in the Delaware Basin.
Yes, sir.
So these would be the samples most representative of the raw produced water that we are considering for this rulemaking. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Would you be surprised to know that those 36 samples were not all analyzed for the same constituents?
No, I would not be surprised to know that.
Okay, so what the would you, knowing that, would you still say that these samples are representative of produced water in the entire basin?
Based, could I clarify by saying based on the parameters that were sampled? Yes.
Okay, I think that's all the questions I have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Knight. Mr. Wexler, do you have any follow-up?
Very briefly, because we have to get Ms. McCurdy out of the airplane. Let me ask you first, Mr. McCurdy. Yesterday, you were asked by the letters of about the letters of authorization for the Railroad Commission. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
And for most part, you were comfortable with those requirements as part of a New Mexico requirement. Is that right?
That is correct.
We also heard discussion of the different levels of projects, bench scale, pilot, demonstration. You recall that discussion?
Yes, sir, I do.
Do you think that the requirements from the Railroad Commission should apply to bench scale projects?
No.
Why is that?
Because bench scale projects are inherently typically performed in a lab in a controlled environment. There's no discharge to the environment whatsoever. Everything's conducted in a lab. Samples are disposed of properly once they're done with. There should be no concern outside of the lab environment as to what's occurring with those bench scale projects. Those projects are designed to outline a treatment process to move it to the next stage to a pilot project.
You were asked earlier today about Dr. Hu's suggestion that discharge permits should not be allowed yet for full-scale developments. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Did you understand that discussion to be about full-scale projects?
Yes, I did.
Would you agree that discharge permits are still needed for pilot projects and that sort of thing?
So if it's a small scale pilot project, much is the same as what Texas is proposing, I would assume is what I just answered a while ago, a similar framework there. So you would still need some sort of permit or authorization to do that.
So you'd still need that discharge permit
Yes.
for those kinds of projects. And you'd therefore need that kind of discharge permit for the research to go forward and our understanding to be advanced.
That is correct.
In the interest of time, Mr. McCurdy, to get you on your plate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. Any reason not to excuse Mr. McCurdy?
I just want to be able to admit his exhibit. So we have McCurdy Exhibit 4, that's his direct. Exhibit 7, that's his resume. Exhibit 11, that's his rebuttal. And Exhibit 75 through 127 are the exhibits that he discusses in his rebuttal.
All right. Ms. Fox, do I see you approaching to make an objection? No? Okay.
See me approaching.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to make sure, I just sent to council and uploaded to the hearing Dropbox.
We need you in a microphone.
Madam Hearing Officer, members of the commission, I just uploaded to the hearing Dropbox and emailed to council ABSC Exhibit 15.
Yes.
Rev, and I just want to make sure that's admitted. Maybe it was previously.
I did.
Okay.
I did. All right. Ms. Nanasi.
Thank you, Mr. McCurdy. I just wanted to renew my request to admit exhibits, new energy economy exhibits 19 through
19 and 20 and 22 through 33. Let me address this proffer first. Hold on just a sec.
I thought that was already.
No.
Sorry.
All right. I have paused for a moment to see if there are objections to NMOGA exhibits 4, 7, 11, or 75 through 127. Okay, those are admitted. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. McCurdy, for your testimony.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the commission for allowing me the opportunity to do so.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Nanasi.
Thank you, and I apologize for interrupting there. Now I'd like to move new energy economy exhibits 19 through 33, and I know that 21 has already been admitted.
Alrighty, so NEE, 19 and 20 and 22 through 33. I'll pause for a moment in the event there are objections.
What I just asked is that we have an opportunity. I would just ask that we have an opportunity to look at those over lunch because I'm not familiar with how to apply.
Okay, so we'll take this up right after the 1 o'clock public comment period. Great. So we have actually reached the lunch hour. Let's come back at 1 for public comment, and we do have several names of folks signed up. Thank you.